everybody! This week on the show I'm going to talk about why girls ruin everything. Happy marriages, dad's dreams of raising sons, white pants if your period strikes unexpectedly. So this week's Ask Kristen question is coming from Shania Aziyama, possibly pronounced Ajama. Hey Kristen.
What up, Shania?
I was wondering if you could do a video on men preferring to have sons over daughters. Although it can be very apparent within certain cultures, religions, and countries, it is still evident in the Western world too. And Shania is absolutely correct. Gold star alert. This is probably most culturally ingrained and statistically apparent in areas of East and South Asia. Customarily, sons are seen as more socially and economically valuable, to the point that some expectant parents, when they learn that they're having a girl, will have an abortion, or what is technically termed a female feticide in this sex selective case, and then try again later for a son. And although boy-girl ratios in the United States don't reflect things like sex selective abortions happening, research has found a similarly consistent paternal preference for sons. If you just look at Gallup poll data going back to the early 1940s, men have consistently said 2-to-1 that if they were to have a kid, they would want it to be a boy. Whereas women have only expressed a slight preference for daughters. So even when we strip away cultural differences that might in fact value boys over girls in certain societies, this parental push to having something that kind of looks a bit like you, maybe, still remains. For men, researchers think that it has to do a little bit more with evolution and spreading their seed, because the fastest way for a guy to spread his genetic pool around the world is to have sons. Meanwhile, there's an idea that women's preference for daughters has actually intensified over the years thanks to something they call a legacy drive. More modern women, like myself, being all like, hey girls, I've really fought hard for all of these freedoms and liberties for us to be housewives or CEOs if we want to. You can finally choose your choice. So I want to have a daughter who can take advantage of and enjoy all of these freedoms that I had to fight for. And of course, a moment here to acknowledge the many men who really want daughters and the many women who really want sons, because I personally know, for instance, people in both camps. And the funny thing, thinking about guys I know who especially want daughters as opposed to sons, are especially motivated because they really want to avoid having anything to do with sporting culture. That makes me laugh, partially because girls also play sports. But if we compare men's desires for sons and women's desires for daughters, research does find that men's desires for sons tends to be a lot stronger, which is why the follow-up question to do men prefer sons is often, do daughters cause divorce? A lot of this has to do with a finding highlighted in an early 2000s paper out of the National Bureau of Economic Research. This signals smart things. It found, among other things, that for unmarried pregnant couples, learning they're gonna have a boy increases the likelihood of them getting married. Divorced dads are 11 to 22% likelier to have custody of their sons in all boy versus all girl families. And finally, speaking of divorce, parents of daughters are likelier to be separated or divorced. All of which raise some really interesting questions about whether men's possibly innate desires for sons means that if he has a daughter instead, it sours him to the entire family. Even though my parents are still married, that as a daughter, you know, that bummed me out a little bit. But thankfully, a more recent study out of Duke University found that, okay, no. After examining a whole lot of long-term data on couples that got together and then had a kid and then got divorced, they found that couples that were already in distress and then got pregnant were likelier to have a girl simply because those female embryos are likelier to survive a stressful pregnancy. Because yes, your relationship stress can absolutely impact the viability of your pregnancy. So it turns out that it's not necessarily daughters arriving on the scene and ruining marriages, but rather the relationship or marriage already being troubled and girls simply having a likelier chance of arriving on the scene because our embryos are all like, whatever, we're gonna survive, I don't care. Thus, it's not so much that we are the predictors of divorce, but rather the survivors. But now I want to know from you, dear viewers, what do you think about this offspring preference pattern? Do you think there's anything wrong with men having a tendency to want sons or women having a tendency to want girls? Or are you super ambivalent like me and just like, I don't know, right now, all I want is a dog? Let me know in the comments below. And thanks to everybody who watched and commented on last week's Ask Cristen video, Fake It Till You Make It. Teresa Badgerek said, speaking as a person who has an invisible illness, faking it to keep up appearances till I made it through recovery was one of the most misguided things I've ever tried to do. Exuding confidence without feeling it, however, can help pave a path towards success so long as you remind yourself that you are a work in progress and there's no deadline in when you have to make it. Learn from my mistakes and don't fake it just for someone else's comfort. Samantha Lopez said, I like when people, especially women, say what they're good at like you did in this video. It seems a lot more fake and inauthentic when, for example, a really studious and smart person says, oh, I'm gonna fail this test, and they end up getting an A. It's not bragging if you say you're good, if you truly are good at it and can prove it. Well, now it's time for you to prove to me what questions you have so that I can give you some answers and some very weak hand gestures.